All right, before we go on today's show, I got an email earlier this week about the 1974 BYU football team being honored August 31st. That's Saturday at BYU's game against Southern Illinois. They're going to be honored as the first team to play in a bowl game for BYU. Remember, back in 1974, that was year 3 of the Lavelle Edwards era. And BYU had a crazy season that year. If you, those of you who are old enough to remember this, BYU started the season with 3 straight losses, then got a tie at Colorado State. And so you're 0-3-1 on the year, and you're like, oh, geez, more of the same. Because this is back in the era where BYU, the first 50 years of their football history, were not very kind to the Cougars. But then they turned it around and started reeling off win after win after win. They actually, in fact, won, I think, 7 straight wins to win the WAC title and punch their ticket to the first ever bowl game in BYU football history. That would be the Fiesta Bowl when they took on now Big 12 member, their fellow Big 12 member, Oklahoma State down there in Tempe, Arizona. BYU did lose that game to Oklahoma State 16-6. The Cougars were ranked 17th in that game, but it was a big deal for BYU, and they're being honored on Saturday night. Well, when I saw this release come to my email, I'm like, what? BYU's had a lot of good seasons, a lot of crazy moments in seasons that end with the number 4. Remember, 1974, first WAC championship, if I recall correctly, and also that first bowl berth in BYU football history. Well, 10 years later, we all know about this. The 1984 national championship season, that trophy, or the trophies, I should say, are all over the student athlete building down there in Provo. Really cool thing to have BYU have a national championship in their trophy case. No matter what some of the detractors might say, show us the hardware if you're going to believe that you have a national championship. Hint, hint. School 40 miles to the north, but hey, nonetheless, 1984. Then we moved to 1994. Now, 1994, I think it gets overlooked for how solid of a season it was for BYU. BYU finished the year ranked 18th in the country. They were 10-3 overall in that season. And the crazy thing about this is, remember, BYU beat Notre Dame at Notre Dame in that game. Jamal Willis, that touchdown will be forever iconic, winning that game in Notre Dame against the 17th ranked Fighting Irish, 21-14. BYU ended up getting ranked after that, never fell out of the rankings the rest of the season. They did lose to Utah that season, so a number 20 versus number 21 matchup. But then the Copper Bowl down there in Tucson, Arizona. Remember, BYU absolutely beat the brakes off a hapless Oklahoma Sooners squad and won that game 31-6. John Walsh was the quarterback. Just crazy stuff for BYU, and a very underrated season. Some high moments in 1994. Now, even the 2004 season, which we all know 2004 was amidst that Gary Croton run of futility that ultimately cost him his job. The 2004 season, it may not have had the record that matches up with these other seasons. Like I said, you have a WAC championship in 74. You got a national championship in 84. You have a 10-3 season in 94 with big wins over 2 of the blue bloods of the sport. Well, 2004 had a different feeling for it because BYU welcomed in the schools like Notre Dame. So 10 years after they beat Notre Dame in Notre Dame came to Provo for that season opener. They also welcomed number 1 USC to Provo. Remember, this is the Matt Leinart, Reggie Bush era USC, Pete Carroll on the sidelines. They played at Boise State in that season as well. It was a pretty vaunted schedule for BYU in 04, but I think the high moment of 04 for me will be that season opener against Notre Dame. Remember, Todd Watkins, Austin Collie, balling out for BYU. They win that game 20-17. It was a crazy scene. There were Notre Dame fans all over the place. I vividly remember, this is kind of just a funny aside, that my brother and I were at that game against Notre Dame, sitting in the south end zone, if I recall correctly. I'm in the southeastern part of the east stands now I think about it. Really up high, nosebleed type seats. But we had some Notre Dame fans in front of us who were very friendly, turned around and introduced themselves. But about midway through the first quarter, my brother just finished drinking a water bottle. This guy turns around and says, "Hey, can I have that water bottle?" to my brother. And at that point, 04, I would have been, I was a 17-year-old senior in high school. And my brother turned and said, "Yeah, sure, you can have it." Guy takes it, and we're sheltered Utah County boys from Orem, Utah. This guy takes a big wad of chewing tobacco, puts in his mouth, and starts spitting into that bottle. And it's gross. I don't condone chewing tobacco at all because I think it's just a nasty thing. The look of shock on my brother's face watching this guy spit that yellow, green, brown liquid into into that water bottle will forever make me chuckle. It's one of those moments indelibly kind of locked into my mind. But that Notre Dame win, I think, was a big one for BYU. It had a lot of us out there thinking that maybe, just maybe BYU turned a corner after some really rough years in 02 and 03 for Gary Croton. But as we found out, it was not to be that way. BYU did have a chance to make it to bowl eligibility that season, late in the season, lost to New Mexico in a disappointing one, 21-14. And then obviously Utah with that loss at the end of the season. But that 04 season had just a really, really solid home slate of games, which brings us to our final one, 2014. Now, 2014, similar to 04, the result of the season may have not been the way you wanted to go, but BYU started that season absolutely on fire. Remember, Taysom Hill was at the peak of his powers. They went to Texas, absolutely blew the doors off the Longhorns, 41-7. Taysom Hill is being talked about as a Heisman Trophy candidate. And then, of course, they play against Utah State on that Friday night in early October, and he gets injured. He's out for the season. Then BYU went on a 4-game losing streak. And then in the month of November, the schedule lightened up a little bit, but BYU ends up reeling off 4 straight wins. Christian Stewart, remember, was the quarterback who outdueled now NFL quarterback Jared Goff in that regular season finale at Cal, a 42-35 barn burner of a game. BYU ends up 8-4 that season, then played in that Miami Beach Bowl, losing in overtime to Memphis. But every one of these seasons that have ended in 4 have had really high moments, big wins over blue blood type programs. So what is 2024 going to hold for BYU? Well, if history is to be believed, it means something big could be coming for the Cougars. Now, I'm not going to proclaim that BYU is going to go out and reel off 13, 14, 15 straight wins and win a national championship a la 1984. But could they be like the 1974 team, which was left for dead after essentially the first month of the season? Once again, they were 0-3-1 after their first 4 games. Brutal scenes. But they ended up reeling off 7 straight wins and winning the WAC title. Could BYU have that type of a season in them? Could they have a 94 type season where it kind of gets overlooked, but it was an overall very solid season for the BYU football program in their history? I'm not sure what to expect, but I'm also not going to count out anything based on the history of these seasons that end in 4 for BYU. It's 50 years. I go back 50 years to 74. Crazy things have happened every time the season has ended with a number 4. Could BYU get big wins over the likes of Kansas State, Arizona, Oklahoma State? Heaven forbid that vaunted Utah team that's the Big 12 favorite this year. Could they go and scuttle some of the dreams for Utah fans up there at Rice-Eccles Stadium? Well, if you want to make them like the 74, 84, 94, 04, or 2014 teams, well, the opportunity's out there for you, and we'll ultimately see what happens. But interesting, just history lesson looking back at the BYU history books. All right. That's what I got for you guys on this Thursday edition of the show. Coming up tomorrow, it's our first game day preview edition of the show. We're talking about Southern Illinois, what to expect from the Salukis as BYU takes them on in the season opener. What will it take for BYU to handle their business and get to 1-0? We'll talk about that. We'll also catch up with BYU offensive lineman Waylon Lapuaho. He will be our special guest on tomorrow's podcast as well. So until then, thank you once again for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. Thank you to all of you who are everydayers with us as well. And until mañana, have a great rest of your day right here on the Locked On Cougars podcast.